youths. Thank you for coming. And friends, you know, we had a series of talks on the occasion of the Bicentenary of the birth of the Bab. And the first talk, we had 6 talks. We had planned 6 talks. The first one was the Ministry of the Bab. That was done by David and Marjani Kilpatrick. The second talk was on the writings of the Bab by Shaheen Mozoon. The third talk, which was a very interesting talk, contemporary appreciation during the Babi dispensation, what other people spoke about what happened in Iran, Persia during that period of time, and how the Bab and the Babis, what they went through. The fourth talk last week was on the station of the Bab. Today we have a talk on the life of the Bab, and then we have one more, which will be the mission of the Bab, which will be in sometime in November. I just want to read a letter from The Guardian that he wrote in 1933 when he edited and translated Nabil's narrative and sent to the West, to America and Canada. And in this letter he said, "Indeed, the chief motive actuating me to undertake the task of editing and translating Nabil's narrative has been to, number 1, enable every follower of the faith in the West to better understand and more readily grasp the tremendous implication of his exalted station, to understand the station. And number 2, to more ardently admire and love him." Basically to fall in love with the Bab, and that's how important. And this is addressed, and he says every believer, which means from young to everybody. And that's why you find Nabil's narrative has been written, and then it has been condensed and condensed and condensed and condensed. There are actually 6 versions condensed until even children's class, they can have stories of Nabil's narrative. So it's such an important story. So that's why we delve into this. So today, we have our very precious and very talented youths who took up this challenge to talk on the life of the Bab. And it was really very welcoming. And we are glad that many friends are here to come and hear and support the talk by the youths. So let me first introduce the youths or the youth committee members. Sheda Mojari. Where's Sheda? Yeah, that's Sheda. Then we have Tara. Tara is there. We have Sophia Kimball. We have Brianna Bareski. Liam. Where's Liam? I can't see Liam. Oh, there you are. I thought you were taller than that, Liam. And then finally, we have the tallest of the tallest, Nafis Egrari. So friends, with that, I hand over to Nafis to lead this talk. Let's give them a warm welcome.
Alaupa, and welcome to tonight's presentation. As Kana said, this is the second to last presentation out of the series of 6, which is dedicated to the upcoming bicentenary of the birth of the Bab. Tonight, our focus is on the personality of the Bab. And as you can see here, we just have a few of the remarkable traits that really made the Bab someone who was really superhuman in a sense. We will convey some of these attributes, such as his power, his affectionate personality, his serenity, his lovingness. But instead of simply telling you these, we will show you these attributes through storytelling. And each of us have prepared stories from different stages in the Bab's life and from different perspectives, such as teachers, parents, etc. And so we're gonna have, again, different stories ranging from his childhood all the way to his martyrdom. And Tara will start us off.
Okay, so I am going to start talking about the stories from his parents' perspectives. So from his mother's accounts, she claimed that the Bab, unlike other children, was not rapacious when drinking milk. He, in fact, only drank milk 4 times a day, and he was gentle, and he didn't move much, and he made no noise. And sometimes it worried his mother, thinking maybe he had some sort of unknown illness. But then she reminded herself that if the Bab had some sort of illness, he would show some sign of agitation. And so instead, she in her accounts, she says that he never complained as a child, and he was very gentle and agreeable. In his father's accounts, she claimed that when the Bab was only 5 years old, he would say his prayers to the threshold of God, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night and recite his obligatory prayers whilst weeping. And then in one last story, which is one of my favorites, is that one time when he was a child, he was at a bathhouse, kind of like this one, and he was sleeping in between his father and his uncle, and he woke up and he said, the vault of the steam house for the women had just collapsed, and 5 women and 1 child has died. And then his uncle told him to go back to sleep, and what manner of talk is this? And, you know, he was kind of disappointed in him. And then not long after, a number of people were coming from the direction of the steam houses for the women and were saying the vault had collapsed, and there are still women under the rubble. And some said there were 20 dead, 30 or 40, but later it was determined that 5 women and 1 child had died. So it was exactly as the Bab had said. So from the takeaway of these stories, the first one is, of course, about how he's gentle and serene and calm and peaceful. And the second one shows that when he was saying his prayers, just even from like such a young age, at only 5 years old, he was so devoted and pious. And then the last story about the bathhouse shows his prophetic nature. He could tell the future, which is, again, as Nafi said, it's almost superhuman. So yeah, I'm going to now introduce Shada, and she's going to talk about the schoolmaster's accounts of the Bab.
Okay, I'm going to tell the story of the Bab schoolmaster, like from his point of view. There are left for posterity some overall recollections about the Bab's personality by his schoolmaster many years after he became aware that the Bab was the founder of a new religion for humanity. These impressions were in addition to his shock and amazement concerning the Bab's depth of intelligence and knowledge at such a young age. One of his qualities that he noticed about the Bab was the nobility of his character and the charm of his personality. He recalled that the Bab was very dignified, serene, and calm. Although he was very handsome, he did not show much interest in pursuing those activities that were common to boys his age. Sheikh Abid also remembered that every now and then the Bab used to come late to school. When asked why he was late, the Bab would typically remain silent. On some occasions, he would become worried about his absence and would end up sending some of his classmates to go check on his whereabouts. They would come back and tell him that they had found the Bab at his own home engaged in prayers. This wasn't commonly expected of children his age. He was about 10 years old then. On one occasion when his schoolmaster questioned the Bab why he was late, he quietly replied that he had been in the house of his grandfather. This was a common way in which those who were descendants of Prophet Muhammad would refer to their time of devotions in the spiritual presence of Muhammad. When Sheikh Abid angrily said that he was only 10 years old, and that such rigorous attention to devotions was not required of him, the Bab calmly said, "I wish to be like my grandfather." His schoolmaster did not make much of it and blamed it to the Bab's innocence and lack of adequate understanding of the subject being covered. So here are some takeaways from the story on the Bab's character, saying that he was very noble, serene, and dignified. And the next story will be by Liam on the Bab's hallowed nature.
Hello, I'm Liam, and I'm here to show 3 stories of the Bob's hallowed nature. So before the Bab revealed himself to Mullah Hussein, those close to him recognized his hallowed nature. What follows are 3 examples of these pure hearts. The Bab was born in Shiraz on October 20th, 1819. His father died when he was very young, so his maternal uncle, Haji Mirza Syed Ali, took the Bab under his complete care. When the Bab was just 9 years old, his uncle took him and several male friends and family members on an outing to visit a holy shrine high up in the mountains. Around midnight, the Bab's uncle woke up and saw his nephew's bed was empty. He searched the area around the camp and could not find the Bab anywhere. Fear gripped his heart as he thought the Bab must have fallen off the mountain. Just as he was giving up all hope, he heard the voice of a child chanting prayers lower down the mountain, and by the cold light of the moon, he saw the small figure of the Bab smiling and on the deserted mountain, pouring out his heart in praise of God. As a child, the Bab spent a great deal of time praying. He would come home to the local mosque and explain, "I was in my grandfather's house," by which he meant the Prophet Muhammad, who was the Bab's great-grandfather many times over. In 1841, the Bab traveled to Karbala. The great teacher Syed Kazem and his student Sheikh Hassan went to visit him. Sheikh Hassan was completely taken aback by the radiance he had shown from the Bab's face and the holy atmosphere in the room. He later described, "He wore a green turban, and his countenance revealed an expression of humility and kindliness which I can never describe. He quietly approached us, extended his arms towards Syed Kazem, and lovingly embraced him. We knew not what seats we actually occupied, so overpowering was the sense of delight which seized us." 3 days later, Syed Kazem was teaching about the Promised One, but immediately stopped when the Bab quietly slipped into the room. A student begged him to continue. Syed Kazem looked meaningfully at the Bab and replied, "What more shall I say? Lo, the truth is more manifest than the ray of light has fallen upon that lap." They did not understand what their teacher meant and asked again, Why is it that you neither reveal his name nor identify his person?" Syed Kazem pointed his finger at his throat. Then the students understood that all their lives would be in danger if he told them. Sheikh Hassan noticed that whenever the Bab was in the holy shrines, he prayed with a love that was so sincere and so beautiful that people worshiping nearby would stop saying their own prayers just to listen to him. And at the request of his mother, the Bab returned to Shiraz from Karbala and soon married Khadija Begum. One day, the Bab came home earlier than usual. After his meal, he went to his room, and later that night, he left his bed and did not return. Khadija searched all the main rooms in the courtyard. Then she looked up and saw a light, and she was surprised as her husband did not usually go in that room unless they had guests. She walked cautiously up the steps. There in the middle of the room stood the Bab. His hands were raised heavenwards, and he was chanting a prayer with tears streaming down his face. She said afterwards, "His face was luminous. Rays of light radiated from it. He looked so majestic and resplendent that fear seized me, and I stood transfixed where I was, trembling uncontrollably. I can neither enter the room nor retrace my steps." The next day, she joined the Bab for their morning tea. As soon as she entered the room, she saw him in the same majesty as she had noticed the night before. The color drained from her face, and she began to tremble. He looked at her with love in his eyes. "What is it that's troubling you?" he tenderly asked her. "We grew up together, and we've been married for 2 years, and now you've been transformed." The Bab smiled. "It was the will of God that you should have seen in me in the way that you did last night. I am the manifestation of God whose advent has been expected for 1,000 years. This light radiates from my heart and from my being." She prostrated herself before him and said, "From that moment, I only live to serve him." So now we will be playing a video which is a prayer revealed by the Bab. This prayer is called "Is There Any Remover of Difficulties?" The Bab revealed this prayer for his wife and asked her to say this prayer when she feels the need to meet the Bab, and this prayer can be read when times are difficult.
Is there any remover of difficulties? Say God. Is there any
هل من مفرج غير الله
say God, praise be God.
قل سبحان الله
He is God. All are His servants,
كل عباد له
and all abide by
وكل بأمره غير الله
remover
غير الله
of difficulties. Say God, praise be God.
سبحان الله
He is God. All are His servants,
كل عباد له
and all abide by
وكل بأمره
Is there any remover of difficulties? Say God.
Okay, so now I'm going to discuss the Bab from the perspective of Mullah Hussein. So before we get started, this is first of all a picture of Mullah Hussein, and he was he was the first leader of the living, and he was one of the first people to believe in the message of the Bab. So he offers a very unique perspective because of this. And then this picture on your right would be the gate in Shiraz, which is relevant in the story. So Mullah Hussein was a scholar, and his soul was engaged in a life-changing quest as he was trying to search for the Bab. He felt drawn initially without any reason to Shiraz, which was a city renowned for the perfume of its roses and the singing of the nightingales. So this place in general was just a very beautiful environment, and Mullah Hussein was drawn to it in his quest. And on the evening of May 22nd, 1844, as he approached the gate on the previous slide,
He was greeted by a radiant young man who wore a green turban. This stranger greeted Mullah Hussein as if he were a lifelong friend. And then this is from the recollection of Mullah Hussein, and he says, "The youth who met me outside the gate of Shiraz overwhelmed me with the expression of affection and loving kindness," recalled Mullah Hussein. "He extended to me a warm invitation to visit his home, and there refresh myself after the fatigues of my journey." So just from this one encounter, Mullah Hussein was able to recognize just this overwhelming love coming from the Bab through his invitation to visit his home, as well as his affection and loving kindness that was so evident just through a second of interaction. And he was also often regarded as very warm and loving towards everyone, whether they were a stranger or someone he knew, because he was willing to open up his own house to someone he didn't know yet, just because of his natural loving personality. And now Nafis will discuss his time in prison.
As Sophie said, I will be sharing a story from when the Bab was in the prison in the town of Maku. Ali Khan was the chief warden for the prison that the Bab was incarcerated in. He was considered one of the toughest people around, who didn't allow much visitation with the prisoners. In fact, he only allowed the Bab 2 visitors, prohibiting them to stay in the town of Maku. One day, the Bab informed his visitor that he would request Ali Khan to alter his attitude towards the believers and to abandon his severity. But how could the Bab convince the domineering and self-willed Ali Khan to relax the severity of his discipline? Well, early the next day, Ali Khan was riding through the wilderness, approaching the gate of the town, when his eyes suddenly beheld the Bab standing by the side of the river. The Bab was deeply engaged in prayer. As Ali Khan tried to approach him, he wasn't able to. He decided to leave and proceeded to question the guards as to why they opened the gate for the Bab, only to find out that the gates were in fact closed, and that the Bab was sitting in his jail cell when Ali Khan arrived at the prison. In complete awe, Ali Khan explained this to the Bab, reverently bowing in his presence, asking for an explanation. He thought he was going mad. But the Bab answered, saying, "What you have witnessed is true and undeniable. God, the All-Merciful, desiring not to afflict you with his punishment, has willed to reveal to your eyes the truth. By his divine interposition, he has instilled into your heart the love of his chosen one, and caused you to recognize the unconquerable power of his faith." This marvelous experience completely changed the heart of Ali Khan. Those words had calmed his agitation and subdued the fierceness of his animosity. By every means in his power, he determined to atone for his past behavior. And so Ali Khan set out, within the limits imposed upon him, to provide whatever would tend to alleviate the rigor of the captivity of the Bab. He later became so intrigued with the Bab's greatness that he would converse with him whenever possible, and eventually he even offered the Bab his daughter's hand in marriage. I think this story really portrays the Bab in a way like no other story does. You have the chief warden who displayed such harsh animosity toward the Bab at the beginning, but ultimately becomes kind. Imagine the vivid reality of seeing the Bab near the river that Ali Khan would have to experience in order to change so drastically. It is really inhuman for someone to be able to impact another person without direct interaction, and to foresee this happening, but the Bab was able to do that. And this is really why the Bab showed such unimaginable spiritual potency, and that he is really incomparable to the average person. His power goes beyond the physical realm. He really wasn't big physically at all. He was actually quite short, but his effects were what were great. And the effect in this case was deeper than making Ali Khan feel remorseful for his animosity. Rather, he made Ali Khan, the chief warden, never want to act that way ever again. He made him kind towards all those who who he surrounded himself with. And the Bab was able to radiate kindness to everyone he neared. And that's shown here, as Ali Khan was the toughest you would ever see, but even the Bab was able to make him kind. And I found this picture here, and it kind of helps me think about it. I imagine the Bab to be someone who is just completely on an elevated level as far as his power and spiritual potency. And as you can see, the man is kind of on the clouds, kind of in his own little world, and that's how I imagine the Bab, considering his wisdom, his incredible ability to influence others, and really his supernatural ability to foresee the future. And now Brianna will present a story regarding the martyrdom of the Bab.
On July 9th, 1850, the young 30-year-old Bab was ordered by the Prime Minister of Persia to be executed in the town square of Tabriz, Persia. In preparation of his fate, the Bab gathered all his works, prayers, writings, and entrusted them to his secretary. And in the final night, before the execution, the face of the Bab was aglow with joy. Unmoved by the storm raging all around him and conscious of approaching victory, he conversed with his companions in utmost gaiety and cheerfulness. Befallen with sadness, Anis fell at the Bab's feet and pleaded that he be killed with the Bab. In the morning, the Bab and Anis were asked to renounce their belief and message, but they were steadfast. The Bab paid no attention and remained wholly calm, showing no signs of fear, anxiety, or confusion. And although insults and extreme violence rained down on them for hours, the Bab walked unalterably firm, and Anis brazenly stood steadfast beside him through this agonizing and tiring ordeal. At noon, 750 gunmen began shooting at the Bab and Anis. The smoke of the firing of 750 rifles was such as to turn the light of the noonday sun into darkness. When the smoke dissipated, the Bab was gone, and Anis was unscathed by any of the bullets. In a panic, the soldiers were sent looking for the Bab. He was found in a cell, finishing some of his work. God spared him for just enough time to finish his writing and his conversation with his secretary. Thank you. He was soon led back to the town square and suspended in the air with Anis. The Bab remained silent, and his appearance and everything about him awakened sympathy and compassion. The orders were given to fire again, and then the Holy Spirit, yielding from its gentle frame, returned to the supreme horizon. The force of the bullets melted the two together, and yet their faces remained untouched, and a smile still lingering on the Bab's face. When put to this test, the Bab's true, serene, and selfless nature shines through the darkness of his horrific fate. He knows it's a small price to pay to give the world this utmost important message. The Bab set in motion a cycle of progressive revelation to humanity. His revolutionary teachings opened the path for the new message of Baha'u'llah. His ultimate sacrifice gave us all a new version of a unified world.
I am the primal point from which have been generated or created things. I am the primal point from which have been generated or created things. I am the countenance of God. I am the light of God. I am the countenance of God. I am the light of God, whose splendor can never be obscured, whose radiance can never fade, whose splendor can
the countenance of God. I am, I am, I am the light of God.
So that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for coming, spending your Friday night here. And thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. We really enjoyed this, and we learned a lot actually about the Bab, new things. And thank you, Kana.
And that concludes the stories and perspectives we have of the Bab. And now Kana is going to wrap us all up.
Friend, don't you think they did an excellent job? Now, your project for next year is a 2-hour talk, but I'm sure you'll be ready for that. Friends, the Bab was 25, Mullah Hussein was 31, Anis was 18. These are the youths who changed the whole history of the faith in Iran. And these are our youths. And you can see that they presented with so much of emotions, so much of feelings. So to prepare this, you got to read the stories. And when you read the stories, you become emotional. You really become emotional. And that's what The Guardian says. The stories of the Dawnbreakers should stir the hearts and something the soul. So they really did research, they studied, and I'm sure when you go and do work on one part of the story, you want to read more and more and more stories, and you want to finish the Dawnbreakers, the Nabil's narratives. That's the way it should be. So thank you, really. And your slides were wonderful. You did an excellent job in the presentation. The photographs, the choice of color, the wording, the size, so that everyone in the room can read it. It was really an excellent presentation. I give you all, for presentation, I teach presentations, and I give you all a 10 out of 10 for the presentation. We are putting all these talks on YouTube. Because if you go on YouTube, you find youths from all over the world presenting or putting on YouTube. So your presentation is really excellent. Really, thank you all for coming and supporting our future. The future is here, The future is here. Thank you very much for coming. Once again, thank you very much.